All right, we are joined once again by our friend Joon Lee. He is a staff writer for ESPN.com, covering the Northeast sector of baseball that's had a lot going on, including our Yankees. June, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm glad that I'm like sitting in front of a microphone versus sitting on a bench outside the spring training facility this time.
That was a fun whirlwind for us.
You're officially our first return guest as well, so it's pretty
Oh,
cool.
awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, of course, it's always a pleasure.
So the last time we spoke to you, like you said, was in spring training. There was a lot of question marks still at that time. The Yankees have had a roller coaster of a season, it seems, so far already through 6 weeks. I mean, they were in last place. Granted, they were above 500 through April. But now they've been the best team in baseball in the month of May since then. They still sit in third in the AL East. A lot of ups and downs. I mean, how should Yankees fans feel on overall through this first 6 weeks?
I mean, I think that there was a level of panic, which is understandable to a degree, about the Yankees in terms of just like the talent actually performing up to its standard. But there was also so many injuries, like on a day-to-day basis, like when I go to the stadium, so much of my job is for ESPN.com now. Like we don't necessarily write about the games on a day-to-day basis unless something crazy happens. And so a lot of what I write when I go to the ballpark is injury updates. And so when I go to Yankee Stadium, it felt like every single day it was not just like one injury update, but it was three injury updates for guys in the lineup, whether it was Harrison Bader, Aaron Judge, or someone in the rotation, Severino, Rodon, you name it. And so it was just not the team that the Yankees built heading into the season. And I think Brian Cashman said that, I think it was 5 weeks into the year or something when he had his almost annual at this point, like, I believe in this team, don't panic press conference. And I think we're at the point where you're starting to see kind of the totality of the talent on the Yankees roster actually come to fruition. I mean, Garrett Cole's having an incredible year so far. I think it's 2.8 wins above replacement. And then you look at the rest of the position players on the roster. Aaron Judge, despite missing games, has a tick under 2 wins above replacement. Anthony Rizzo is having an incredible year at the plate. Anthony Volpe, despite not hitting above 215 for most of the season, is third on the team in wins above replacement. Harrison Bader has been incredible since coming back from the injury list. He's kind of continued that playoff home run hitting tear that he was on coming into this regular season. So, when I look at the Yankees, I picked them to, I think they'll either make it to the World Series or win the World Series this year. This is one of the most talented teams in baseball. And as much as Yankee fans love to panic about this team, you look at the talent up and down this roster. Like if everything hits at the right time, that this is going to be one of the best teams in baseball over the course of 162 games, and they just need an opportunity if they're all healthy to show that.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And I mean, injuries were rampant well before the season even started. And I think that was kind of one of the more jarring things for Yankees fans because a lot of the times we would get plagued with the injuries mid-season. This came so early that you didn't really know what the starting lineman was going to look like, going into the first month of the year. And all things considered, I mean, we definitely kind of pumped the panic brake maybe a little bit too early, but they stayed above 500 that entire time. And I think that's just insanely impressive considering they are in by far the most competitive division.
Yeah, I think that's really important context is that this is such a tough division right now. I mean, the Blue Jays, I think, are, as we currently speak, in last place.
Yeah.
And they would be tied for first place in the AL Central right now. Like this is such an incredibly competitive division. I think that the schedule realignment is playing a huge role in just the record of all these teams, and I think is going to benefit the AL East in terms of setting them up for the wild card race because the teams aren't beating each other up as much anymore versus beating up on the rest of baseball. And so when I kind of look at all of that too, I think it kind of factors into the Yankees' favor because as hot a start as the Rays are off to, they're starting to close the gap with the rest of the division now. They're coming back down to earth. The Orioles are 2.5 games behind. The Yankees are 5.5 games behind. And it wasn't that long ago. I think it was like a week and a half ago. The Yankees were in last place and now they're in third place. So I think we're just going to see this kind of like maneuvering throughout the division for basically the entire season because I think that all these teams are capable of finishing above 500. We'll see if that actually turns out to be the case. But I don't know. I look at the Yankees. I still see one of the most competitive teams, competitive rosters in all of baseball. And on top of that, you're still getting Carlos Rodon back at some point. And Rodon has clearly been pushing the Yankees to try to throw more, and they've been the ones holding him back because I feel like there's been this narrative online, especially in the Yankee fan base, about Rodon, being injury prone. He's been pushing to try to get back on the field, and the Yankees have been the one that have been cautious. And so I think that there's been a little bit of an unfair portrayal of Carlos in that regard. But when Carlos has been healthy throughout the course of his entire career, he's been an extremely dominant pitcher, especially the last couple of years. The health has always been a question with him, and so we'll see whether or not that lasts. But I mean, Garrett Cole's off to one of the best starts of his career this year, and it's hard to kind of discount that when factoring the Yankees' postseason chances.
Yeah, no, we've talked quite a bit actually about how Garrett Cole just seems like his mentality's kind of completely changed this year. And he chalked it up to being his like first normal season with the Yankees, where he doesn't have to deal with COVID. He doesn't have to deal with like the shortened spring training due to the lockout and all that. So we're seeing him much more settled in Garrett Cole. And that has directly resulted in him giving up fewer home runs and challenging guys more in like better quadrants of the zone rather than getting frustrated and trying to throw fastballs right down the middle at 100 miles an hour. So it's really cool to see him take this massive leap with the Yankees because we all knew that he was capable of it, but it finally seems like he's reaching his potential as like that top ceiling of being an ace.
Yeah, and I think that an underrated aspect in all of this is that Garrett's always been the kind of guy who is very cerebral on the mound, thinks a lot about the intention of every single pitch that he throws, and I think that the pitch clock and speeding him up and giving him less time to kind of overthink on the things on the mound has been a benefit. That's been kind of one of the whispers that I've heard around the team is, there's always the sense of like trying to help manage Garrett's mindset and making sure that he has the right mentality when he's on the mound. Because we've seen not just in the Bronx, but throughout the course of his entire career where he's had those moments where things start to really speed up on him, then he overthinks things and he kind of falls apart mentally on the mound. And I think that the pitch clock has actually been a huge benefit for him in terms of, okay, there's a certain amount of time. I just got to choose my pitch and I got to throw it because it's easy to forget, I guess, when Garrett does fall apart mentally on the mound, that this guy just has some of the best pure stuff in all of baseball. And sometimes you don't need to overthink like placement and, location, all that stuff and sequencing when you just can dominate guys with, one of the high spin rate fastballs in all of baseball and an incredible slider. Like that's sometimes all you need. And I think that Garrett has been able to kind of take advantage of that this year.
Yep. 100%.
The Yankees, especially since Bader and Judge have gotten back from injury, have been kind of riding their performance. I mean, Rizzo, as you mentioned, has been unreal all year. Judge has gone back to his otherworldly rate of contribution. And Garrett Cole, like you said, has been one of the best pitchers in baseball, has just a sub-3 WAR as a starting pitcher, which is unreal through the first 6 weeks of the year. You mentioned the talent that the Yankees have, but do you think that they're relying too much on their top end talent? Is this level of performance sustainable, especially given how competitive the East is?
I think that it's okay to ride your top end talent through stretches of the season. And I think that the Yankees are in a perfectly fine stretch where they're supposed to do that. But I do think that you bring up the valid concern of needing the depth of this roster to eventually shine through, like needing DJ LeMahieu to hit more than 250. Like as good as Volpe has been in the field, and when he gets on base, he's been a dynamic base stealer as well. You need him to hit more than 212 throughout the course of the entire year. And he's a guy who barely spent any time in AAA. And so the jump from, mostly AA at bats to a handful of AAA at bats to major league pitching is enormous. Like, the best AAA pitcher is a borderline major league, reliever, sometimes starter. And then you're suddenly facing guys of the caliber of like, the best pitchers in the sport, Justin Verlander, all that stuff. Not necessarily that saying that they faced the Yankees this year, but though that caliber of pitcher you're suddenly facing, it's a huge jump. And so, they're eventually going to need to get Giancarlo Stanton back and healthy and hitting. And the bottom third of this order is something that really concerns me. Like Oswaldo Cabrera hasn't been as good this year. The depth of the lineup hasn't been as good, but you need Gleyber Torres to be better. You need the rest of that roster to be better in order for this team to, I think, ostensibly plausibly make a deep run into the postseason. Because as much as we love talking about star power in baseball, like I think the Angels show year after year that like having the best star power isn't necessarily something that you know leads to postseason success. And I think that's spot on, in that like the rest of this team needs to step up as well.
Yeah, we're in a weird spot with Glaber because he is really good at like a lot of things that you need from a good baseball player in terms of like batting with runners in scoring position. He's excellent at moving guys, to either third or scoring them even. But it just seems like he makes these mental errors time and time again. And like those lapses is what makes him so frustrating to watch. It's because you really want him to like secure himself as the starting second baseman. But he just, I don't know. I can't get over that hump with him sometimes.
I think part of it too is that like the expectation with Glaber when he came in was like one of the top prospects in baseball, right? And when he came up, there was all this hype around him about him being, one of the best middle infielders in the entire sport. And then what you've gotten is, flashes of brilliance at times, but then there's just like those frustrating things. I think it doesn't help too that like in 2019 he almost hit 40 homers, and you felt like you were starting to get a glimpse of like, oh, this guy could be really a superstar middle infielder. And then obviously, he's had his struggles at shortstop over the years defensively. But he had a great season last year. He had 4 wins above replacement. As frustrating as he is, like he is a guy that can contribute to a winning team over the course of the entire year. And part of me wonders if it's like the Yankee fan base just need to recalibrate what they think about Glaber and what they think his potential is. Like, I feel like that's the case with a lot of top prospects where it's so easy to hype guys up. But when you look back at the top prospect lists over the years, how many of those guys actually end up fulfilling that's like superstar potential? And like Glaber becoming like a guy who puts up 3 to 4 wins a year, like it's not necessarily the superstar that you would have expected, but I feel like most teams take that like 9 times out of 10 without the hype context like Glaber came up in. And so this just might be the guy that it is. And I would say that like the majority of teams around baseball would probably take Gleyber Torres as their second baseman, frustrations included. When you kind of take away the context of him being this like, top tier prospect when he was coming up, I think when you remove that, it's kind of easier to accept what he is. And you kind of accept that like, this is kind of what the entire package is at this point.
Yeah, I mean, and that leads into another question. What happens with Oswald Peraza? Because it seems like Volpe is going to get every opportunity to be the full-time shortstop at this rate. So, I mean, Peraza was right up there with prospect rankings up until this season, and then that kind of has diminished real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is the Yankees approaching the shortstop competition in the manner that they did, and not even thinking about Peraza as the starting shortstop on opening day. And I think that like being willing to go to Volpe with him having so few AAA at bats, it makes the other teams around baseball be like, all right, so if the Yankees are willing to do that, like how valuable is this guy? Because I think one of the things that often gets missed in the conversation around top prospects is that a lot of this is just projections and teams selling the quality of their prospects from the scouts to the front office to reporters who make this list. And so oftentimes I think the Yankees are as good at selling the hype around their top prospects as anyone. It is often a mix of like how much of this is reality versus how much this is the Yankees hype machine just like overwhelming the media ecosystem. And I don't know the answer to that, just because I never saw Oswald Peraza like coming up through the minor leagues, and so I can't say for sure like whether that hype was justified coming up. But I mean, what we've seen in the major leagues, it hasn't necessarily been what we've expected. And would it be the first time that you saw this from a Yankee prospect as well?
Yeah, it's just tough because his glove is so good.
Yeah. I mean, and like I think that's part of why he's going to continue to get opportunities in the major leagues. It just doesn't seem like it's going to happen as the starting shortstop of the Yankees, because they're going to give Volpe every single opportunity to succeed. Because if they wanted to bench him, they could have at this point. Like they could have said that he's hitting 212, but you look at the the position player stats on the Yankees, like he's third in B WAR right now, despite hitting 212, which I think shows kind of the totality of his contributions on the team. And so it's tough to see at this point where the room is. Like, I would much rather be Oswaldo Cabrera than I would be Oswald Peraza. Like, obviously Oswaldo's struggling this year, but I was talking to him like a couple weeks ago, and he's just constantly preparing to play literally every position on the field at any given moment, and he knows that that's what his value is towards the Yankees. And we've seen him hit, and so I think that like. I'm really curious to see how someone like him develops, because he's such a modern MLB player in terms of like the potential versatility that he brings on a day-to-day basis. But I would much rather be in his position than I would be in Peraza's position.
100%. And his just personality and everything is built for Yankees.
Oh my God, he's built for New York. He loves playing in New York.
I think the Volpe conversation is super interesting because you wrote that awesome piece that came out on opening day about his family being New Yorkers and his time coming up as a top prospect. And obviously the Yankees are investing that time in him. But you mentioned, he is a below or right at league average offensive player right now. I mean, 89 OPS plus, below league average, WRC plus puts him a bit above from that recent home run stretch. And I think the stolen bases that he adds, but he's third in the Yankees in BWAR, like you mentioned, and that's coming from fielding, even though he's made a few errors. That's coming from how he can be a menace on the base paths. His development has been really accelerated. So I think the Yankees do need better production from their shortstop. But what are the Yankees expecting from Volpe this year? Where do they see him progressing and getting to that level that they could use, or are they still kind of putting him in the background and letting him develop?
They're being so cautious in how they talk about him, because I'll see Boone talking in press conferences where people are just asking about like the expectations and what they want out of Volpe and where they want to hit him. And Boone is always just like, he's so vague in how he talks about him, because he doesn't want to put any expectations on him. But I think everyone knows that they are also expecting him to do something. I mean, I've seen him, Volpe, walking around the clubhouse the last couple of weeks. And I remember the first couple of weeks of the year, he was clearly like overwhelmed by the entire experience, like being in New York, being a Yankee, being in the major leagues, adjusting to all of that. And the last couple of weeks, he's kind of settled in, and I think he's a little bit more chill than he was the first couple of weeks. And so for me, I'm really curious to see, like, especially in the second half of the year, what he ends up looking like, because he's going to have some time to process and make adjustments to the adjustments that major league pitchers are making to him. I think they're expecting him to at least be a league average shortstop from a from the totality of his production, both offensively and defensively. I think that he's, pretty much doing that. I think that they're pretty impressed by the amount of pop that he's showing. Like, it seems like his swing is kind of well catered to Yankee Stadium. Like, he's not going to have light tower power, but he hits the ball the other way, and that's going to scoot over the fence sometimes. He's got line drive power that goes over the left field fence pretty frequently. He's a guy who I think is going to hit for power, and so I think they're just waiting for him to hit for a higher average. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if we go through a stretch at some point in the next couple of months where he hits like 350 for 2 weeks, and his batting average only goes from 220 to 260. I think that feels like a realistic place that the team is kind of expecting him to be. But again, they're being super vague about how they talk about him, because they've thrown him in the leadoff spot. Like, you don't just do that, especially when you're a team like the New York Yankees that has a playoff expectations. They clearly have a lot of faith in him, and they're trying to show through their actions how much faith they have. I think it's just a matter of that faith coming to fruition. And for me, like, I kind of believe that it's going to happen at some point. It's just a matter of when.
I know you probably haven't gotten the chance to be with the team since Aaron Hicks was DFA'd. But that was a move that I think came a bit quicker than we thought it would, though I know a lot of Yankees fans were clamoring for it.
Not soon enough in the eyes of so many.
Yeah. Aaron Hicks was the longest tenured position player on the Yankees. I mean, it seemed like he was really revered by teammates. He had a nice stretch before he was finally DFA'd, in which the team was really celebrating him. How do the players like Aaron Hicks? I know there's a lot of issues in like going to reporters and stuff over the last year, his discontentment, but how is he viewed in the locker room, and how do you think this might impact how the players feel?
I think when people think about Aaron Hicks, they think about the totality of his impact on the Yankees. And so It's when a guy's struggling to the degree that he's struggling, it's hard for that to not affect other people because you just come to the ballpark and like you're getting prepared to be booed and you just have kind of this negative aura around you. Like it was kind of true around Joey Gallo last year. And so I think that like he always tried to bring as positive an attitude as he could considering the circumstances, but it's impossible to not have that kind of struggle affect you or just manifest in some sort of insecurity. And that's kind of understandable. Like you're getting booed on like opening day and people want you off the team from the get-go. Like I can't like I've never been in that position where you're in a stadium, 45,000 people on a nightly basis and people are booing you at every single opportunity. And so I think when you're struggling to that degree, it's hard for it to not have some sort of like a negative effect on the vibe of the clubhouse. Cause I don't know, we've all been around negative people before. When things are going bad for someone, it's, you want to support them as much as you can. But if that negativity gets to a point where it's, vibrating off of you and it's coming to the media too, like the way that he talks about his time in New York, it's hard to not let that at least moderately affect the vibe of the clubhouse. So I think that there's kind of this multifaceted opinion about him where, people understand like he's been here with the Yankees for such a long time. He's had, a very accomplished career in many regards. And he's also in more recent years been someone who has struggled a lot and has carried that aura around him and that affects the clubhouse.
Do you think that wrist sheath injury he had a few years ago might be like one of the biggest parts of his downfall as a Yankee? Just because it seems like that's one injury that is very difficult to come back in terms of like the power tool and stuff like that. I mean, his arm is finally back to where it was post TJ, but it seems like that injury in particular is what's caused his swing to fall off significantly.
I mean, I've never talked to him about that, so I don't necessarily want to speculate, but I do think that there has been like a mental aspect to all of this in terms of just like when you hear the boos all the time and like Aaron Boone last year was constantly talking about like having to manage Aaron Hicks and be cognizant of kind of his mindset and his headspace because he was struggling and trying to like, direct him in the right direction without also like letting that negativity almost spread to everyone else because the Yankees were very good last year, but here was this guy who's like really struggling, having literally the worst time of his career, and you need to kind of make space for all of that while also trying to keep your eyes on the bigger picture goal. And so it was easy to kind of see how the mental stuff would affect him at the plate in terms of his headspace. And so, I don't necessarily want to speculate on the injury just because like I haven't talked to him about that, but I think it was pretty clear that like just there was a snowball effect over the course of the last couple of years in terms of how all of this was affecting him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Get us tickets into the Boston, New York sports writers softball game, and we'll boo you, and then you can let us know how that feels.
I think it's in like a week and a half. It's our like our annual game at Yankee Stadium is I think it's like the first week of June or something. So I'm excited about that.
Nice.
How does one get tickets to such an event?
I don't think it's ticketed. I think you just got to know someone and you got to show up, at the security gate at the right time.
We just be like, hey, we knew in June he's on the team. So
I'm pitching for Team Boston though. So
exactly, we're gonna boo. We have to get in the bleachers and just yell from out there. Because I played there in high school, and there was a lot of people, but only like 1,000 people in the bowl at Yankee Stadium. It sounds like completely empty, which it is, but everything you hear is like echo, echo, echo. Like
yeah,
it's very eerie. And speaking of Boston, this AL East has been on fire. Everyone really, except for the Blue Jays of recently. And that means the Red Sox too, who by all accounts most accounts anyways, were projected to be in last place. Didn't seem to have the pitching there. Right now, they're only 2 games behind the Yankees. Baseball Reference still projects them to only have a 23% chance of making the playoffs. But they've put together a bunch of good stretches. I mean, we haven't seen the Red Sox yet. What should we expect from this Red Sox team? What's good about them?
I think that they've been consistently inconsistent. So they'll go through stretches where they look incredible and the offense is clicking and like Chris Sale is great and the pitching looks great. And then you'll have nights like Corey Kluber, giving up 6 runs in 2 innings, which has kind of been his entire season. Nick Pivetta, recently got moved from the starting rotation to the bullpen. So I think you're going to have, times where this team looks fantastic. Alex Verdugo's had an incredible season from the leadoff spot. He's kind of had the breakout season that people have been waiting for him to have for a couple of years now, and people were starting to doubt whether he would actually have. Devers is still Devers. I think Jaron Duran has been one of the most valuable offensive players for this team after, going through a stretch last year where he was kind of reviled by the fan base because of how he was handling kind of the criticism and going back and forth with fans during the middle of games. Like Connor Wong, their catcher, has been very good this year. He's got a win above replacement. Masataka Yoshida has, hit 300 and has been very consistent offensively for the most part. There's a lot of kind of bright spots for this team, but I think the thing that I think is actually the opposite problem for the Yankees is that like the baseline talent is not nearly as high as like the Yankees. And so they kind of need like every single thing to click for this team to have a shot at the postseason. And you look at this roster right now, at least offensively, like everything you needed to click has kind of been clicking in terms of Alex Verdugo and Duran and Connor Wong and Yoshida. Adam Duvall's been injured, but like, you've had like a lot of levels of the offense clicking, and the pitching has kind of been inconsistent too. And so, they'll go through stretches where they look like, they can beat any team in baseball. And then they'll also go through stretches where they'll get swept by last place teams. And so I think that this is kind of the dynamic that a lot of people expect to see around this team for the entire year. They'll go through periods where they're a couple games above 500. Maybe they'll go through a couple stretches where they're below 500 and they're going to be barely hanging on in the wild card race throughout the course of the season.
Do you think they're going to be buyers or sellers when it comes to the trade deadline, or?
Oh man.
Loaded question.
I think it's going to really depend on where they are at the trade deadline. If they're like close, then maybe, but they're so dependent on like selling the future for this team that I have a hard time believing that Heim is going to go out and trade like Miguel Bleis and Ceddanne Rafaela. And, I think Marcelo Myers is going to jump up in the prospect ratings by midseason this year. And so it's kind of hard to see them like dealing any of their prospect depth because they're really selling the future of this team on that. I think there's a chance they might just like hold, maybe get some starting pitching help around the edges to like kind of fill in that gap that they thought Kluber or Pivetta might fill, but it's hard to see them kind of going all out and like going for it this year.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good for the Yankees anyway. But the longer the Red Sox stick around, the tougher it's going to be. And I think we're fortunate this year to have that distributed schedule. So that way the talent of the AL East is kind of getting more reflected in the record than it's been in the past. So we'll see how it goes. We're going to have a lot of fights with the Red Sox throughout the summer. And I think we'll check in with you between, if we can at some point, about the halfway point between some of those fights. So Joon, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you level setting our expectations of our crazy Yankees fandom, being that inside information. Jake, any last words?
No, thank you again for being here. It's always a pleasure to have you on and talking Yankees and just AL East in general, and then whatever else comes our way.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.